In an article from Bugatti City Paper, Sarah Melania Ferreri Valencia from Observatory of Racial Discrimination said, "In Colombia, there is much more discrimination against persons with darker skin compared to those with intermediate to lighter skin. For decades, one of the United States' closest allies in Latin America, Colombia, has fought a constant conflict when it comes to receiving rights and equality for indigenous and marginalized Afro-Colombian people in their country against a government whose main purpose is to support and protect their rights under law. Although Colombia is often voted as one of the world's happiest countries according to the survey of the Biometer of Happiness and Hope Foundation in 2013 and 14 that claimed Colombia as the #1 happiest country in the world, it still has some unmet needs for its people, especially the indigenous and marginalized Afro-Colombian citizens of Colombia. Today, I will explain the lives and struggle of Afro-Colombians and their fight to receive equal rights and equality, alongside explaining how the United States has helped advance Colombia in terms of racial equality and basic human rights. Being the second largest African descent population in South America and having the world's second largest biodiverse ecosystem after Brazil, Colombia is a special country, with the Afro-Colombian communities accounting for 10% of the country's population and the indigenous people accounting for 3.3% of the population. Colombia is home to blacks, mulattoes, Rizalis, Palingetos, and Zambos. And with two of Colombia's main most visited cities, Cartagena and Cali, having some of the highest population of Afro descents in South America after Salvador, Brazil. Most of Colombians reside in rural areas. Areas such as the northern coast, Pacific coast, rivers, and banks of the country, like Cali, Cartagena, Coco, the Cayuca River, and the Magdalena River, has the majority of the African descendant population in Colombia. Many Afro-Colombians also had to flee to poor, poverty-stricken neighborhoods in the country's largest cities, such as Cartagena, due to Colombia's ongoing armed conflict battle. In addition, about 80% of Afro-Colombians reside in extreme poverty conditions, while approximately 74% make less than minimum wage. In the Coco department, the largest African descent population of Western Colombia has the lowest per capita poverty level of government investment, including health, education, and infrastructure for Afro-Colombians. And at least 30% of them are illiterate, with a percentage of 40% of illiteracy in some rural black communities. With an unequal healthcare system, Afro-Colombian communities only get about a 10% healthcare coverage, while their white counterparts community receive 40% of healthcare coverage. But on a more positive note, although Afro-Colombians seem to be the overlooked population of the country, they live among some of Colombia's most biodiverse, resource-rich land that includes birds, plants, orchids, butterflies, freshwater fish, and amphibian species, making it the second highest biodiverse country in the world after Brazil. Although life is doable for Afro-Colombians when they reside on their side of the coast, they are still faced with racial discomfort and prejudice when working in a society and culture that still views people with light skin and straight hair as more superior. Colombia's National Public Defender Office reported in 2016 that an estimate of over 800 complaints of formal racism and discrimination were filed from people of color. Afro-Colombians experience and endure various forms and acts of racial discrimination and prejudice even after the long-term effects of the 50-year war between the Colombian government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, which is FARC. And although the country has a peace agreement that grants rural land reform and development as reparation for black men and women victims, inequality and discrimination are still affecting the Afro-Colombian communities in the country today. With the ongoing fight to amend racial inequality and improve Afro-Colombians' human rights, the Colombian Truth Commission released its final report in June of 2022, stating and highlighting the necessity of addressing historical injustice, prejudice, racism, gender-based violence, and violence against Afro-descendant and indigenous people. But not everyone is for Afro-Colombians receiving the same number of opportunities and rights as their other racial counterparts. Human rights defenders face backlash, attacks, threats, and harassment because of their efforts, while defenders of the land, territory, and environment were particularly at risk for backlash. FARCA EP Michelins were the victims as well of killings and threats. In addition, attacks on media establishments and employees persisted, putting the right to free speech under danger. Indigenous and Afro-descendant communities were forcibly evicted, causing some of them to experience humanitarian crisis, while indigenous leaders and defenders were also attacked and killed. And issues like the legalization of abortion and attacks on individuals of the LGBTI community occurred alongside with violence on gender base persisted while survivors endured ongoing barriers to accessing justice, truth, and reparation. But in hopes of a better tomorrow for vulnerable individuals and communities like the Afro-Colombians, legislative measures had to have been taken to enact laws prohibiting racial profiling and discrimination. Colombia's President Juan Manuel Santos signed an anti-discrimination law that is a homage to equality and a form of justice. The law not only settled the historical racial discrimination African Colombians have faced, but also to other vulnerable groups of people based on ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, and nationality. President Santos said it was time to get tough on this and to ensure the protection of the rights of those discriminated against. In the tireless efforts, the United States joined with Colombia in hopes of making the efforts more fruitful. In January of 2010, the United States and Colombia produced an action plan to eliminate and combat racial discrimination among Black minorities. The agreement from the U.S. to Colombia was a racial action plan called CAPRI. CAPRI, the U.S.-Colombia Action Plan on Racial and Ethnic Equality, was held in Cali, Colombia, to embody a joint commitment from both governments to ensure that African descendant and indigenous communities in which both countries receive the same prosperity and equal opportunities to advance like their white counterparts. The plan focused on sharing best practices between the two nations and putting in place programs to address barriers ethnic communities were facing. So, in conclusion, we have looked at the lives and struggles of Afro-Colombians in their ongoing fight to receive equal rights and equality. Although Colombia has the second largest African descendant population in Latin America, with some of the largest Afro-Colombian cities in South America, they as a community still endure and face unequal treatment and opportunities in Colombia, and it is evident through the way that they must live. Through violence and opposition and efforts of improving their way of life, Afro-Colombians are victims and are in need of justice, truth, and reparation. But with the help from other nations and governments such as the United States, to help ensure inclusive prosperity and equal opportunities to advance the livelihood of Afro-descendants and indigenous communities, there is hope for a better tomorrow all around the world.